Hi, I'm Melissa Stramel from Lilac Lane Patterns. I design children's clothing patterns, and today we're going to talk about smocking. This dress was created through smocking, or sometimes you might hear this term referred to as shirring. They are pretty interchangeable. And it's just created by using elastic in the bobbin thread, and makes just a beautiful ruffled look of gathers. And although it is not a really difficult technique to do, you have to hand wind the elastic onto your bobbin. And so I've come up with a little bit easier way that you can do smocking. And it is this dress, and it's called Faux Smocking. To start with, you look at the pattern, and the pattern will already call for smocking. So the first thing you want to do is just go ahead and look at the neckline or whichever area that you're working on to be smocked. In our case, we're just right here at the neckline. And the pattern probably calls for something like turn under 1/4 of an inch twice, but in this case, we'll be smocking with 3/8 inch elastic. So to start with, press under the top 1/8 of an inch and then 1/2 inch, and these 1/2 inch casings are just perfect to hold the 3/8 inch elastic. I'm going to go ahead and top stitch right along the edge of this casing that we've created, and just keep your top stitch going right along the edge here. And I always back stitch at the beginning of my seams, just to make sure that when we are ready to insert the elastic, everything stays in place. Nothing comes unsewn and has to be redone. And back stitch again when you get to the end. Now here's what it looks like after you've created your casing. The next thing we're going to do is use some bias tape. Double fold bias tape will work fine. It's more easily found. Single fold bias tape is great too. So whatever you find, as long as it's the 1/2 inch wide. Of course, you're going to want to match your bias tape to your project. But for me, I'm going to use this pinkish bias tape today, just so you can see it really well while I'm working. And according to how your pattern calls for the smocking, normally a row of smocking is about every 1/2 inch. And since the bias tape is also a 1/2 inch, this will work just great for our project. And then you'll add a row for each amount as the pattern calls for it. We're going to go ahead and sew the bias tape on right beneath the first casing that we just created. And once again, top stitch. Now on this bias tape, I like to go ahead and let it hang off the edge a little bit. And then we can trim that up when we finish top stitching it on. So we're going to top stitch right along both rows, both the top and the bottom of the bias tape that you're using. Okay, so we've sewn on the top, and then you would just go right ahead and finish the bottom at the same time as well. And now just taking your shears, just go ahead and preserve the shape of your armhole by cutting right along both of those edges. And then your bias tape will be exactly the size of that opening, instead of measuring ahead of time and then being a little bit off and having to rip and start over, which is never fun for anyone. Now, the next thing we need to do is measure each casing, and as you can see in my sample here, it gets progressively bigger. So we're going to want to measure each one, and this top one right here is right at 19 inches. So since smocking draws the fabric up to about 1/2 of its original width, we're going to cut 3/8 inch elastic to half of what each of these casings is. In this case, the 19-inch casing will be 9.5 inches of elastic. I like to insert pins on both ends of the elastic. The first one will help you scoot it through the casing. As you can see here, that draws right through the little casings you've made. Isn't this simple? You'll be smocking everything with no worries after you. It's also a great, some other areas that smocking is added to quite a bit of time is at the bottoms of the sleeves or the middle of the sleeve area or at a waistband. A lot of times in women's garments, it's smocked from the top through the waist. So once we get the elastic drawn to where the end of the elastic is at the end of your casing, and this pin stopped it from pulling through, we're going to remove the pin and just top stitch on the edge right here to hold our elastic in, and that way we won't lose it while we pull it through the rest of the casing. So then you just feel for your pin and continue pulling your elastic through. And once you have done all 3 rows, as you can see, it's gathered up here and it's just beautiful, and you pull it and the fabric all evens out and it makes beautiful smocking or shirring that looks just like the garment made with the elastic thread. The pattern for this dress is found on the website, and to finish this particular dress, all you need to do is sew both side seams and then add the bias binding to the armholes on each side, and it tells you how much bias binding to cut so that you have enough for the ties. And then to finish the hemline, you will also use bias tape there. It's a very simple project. I hope you'll add smocking to many of your projects from now on.